The Byzantine-Seljuq Wars were a series of decisive battles that shifted the balance of power in Asia Minor and Syria from the Byzantine Empire to the Seljuq Turks, riding from the steppes of Central Asia. The Seljuq Turks replicated tactics practiced by the Huns hundreds of years earlier against a similar Roman opponent, but now combining it with newfound Islamic zeal. In many ways, the Seljuq Turks resumed the conquest of the Muslims in the Byzantine-Arab Wars initiated by the Rashidun, Umayyad and Abbasid Caliphate in the Levant, North Africa and Asia Minor. Today, the Battle of Manzikert is widely seen as the moment when the Byzantines lost the war against the Turks. However, the Byzantine military was of questionable quality before 1071, with regular Turkish incursions overrunning the failing theme system. Even after Manzikert, Byzantine rule over Asia Minor did not end immediately, nor were any heavy concessions levied by the Turks on their opponents. It took another 20 years before the Turks were in control of the entire Anatolian peninsula, and not for long either. During the course of the war, the Seljuk Turks and their allies attacked the Fatimid Caliphate of Egypt, capturing Jerusalem and catalyzing the call for the First Crusade. Crusader assistance to the Byzantine Empire was mixed with treachery and looting, although substantial gains were made in the First Crusade. Within 100 years of Manzikert, the Byzantines had successfully driven back the Turks from the coasts of Asia Minor and extended their influence right down to Palestine and even Egypt. Later, the Byzantines were unable to extract any more assistance, and the Fourth Crusade even led to the sack of Constantinople. Before the conflict petered out, the Seljuks managed to take more territory from the weakened Empire of Nicaea until the Sultanate itself was taken over by the Mongols, leading to the rise of the Ghazis and the conclusive Byzantine-Ottoman Wars. Origins. The war's distant origins lay in the formation of the Byzantine Empire from the collapsing Roman Empire in the 4th century. Prior to the formation of the Byzantine realm in the 3rd century AD, the Roman Empire faced a severe military and political crisis. Political assassinations and dangerous campaigning led to 32 emperors seizing and losing power within 50 years of Roman history. Matters were made worse with an economic and demographic problem. The population of the Roman Empire began to fall in the 4th century due to a lack of conquest leading to a lack of slaves, a vital and significant group of people in the empire. Reforms by emperors like Constantine I and Theodosius I prolonged the Roman Empire, but nonetheless the empire split into eastern and western halves. In 395 AD, the western half was plagued by barbarian invasions, collapsing in 476 AD, whilst the eastern half survived and began to undergo Hellenization, transforming into what historians label today as the Byzantine Empire. Unlike the western half of the Roman Empire, the eastern half experienced fewer barbarian invasions, although encounters with the Huns and Persians kept the Byzantines busy enough from making any serious recovery attempts in the west. In the 7th and 8th centuries, the Byzantines experienced several coordinated Arab invasions, losing several vital provinces, such as Egypt and the Levant. A Byzantine resurgence under the Macedonian dynasty allowed the Byzantines to reconquer parts of Syria and Mesopotamia. In particular were the efforts of Basil II, who from the late 10th century to early 11th century transformed the empire into the most powerful state in the medieval world. Despite this, the Byzantines were far from safe. With the death of Basil II came a series of emperors who failed to secure the empire against external threats. The biggest threat to the empire since the Arab invasions were the Turks. The Turks were much like the Byzantines' former enemies, the Huns, combining their excellent riding skills with Islamic zeal. The Turks who converted to Islam in the 7th and later 8th centuries were to become a formidable enemy to a Christian state in decline. As the Byzantines were making headway against the Arabs in the 10th century, Persia was being ruled by the Ghaznavids, another Turkic people. The migration of Seljuq Turks into Persia in the 10th century led to the Ghaznavids being overthrown. There they settled and adopted Persian language and customs. The Seljuqs established a powerful domain and captured Baghdad in 1055 from the Abbasid Caliphate. The Abbasid Caliphate henceforth became a mere figurehead in the Islamic world. Encounters between the Seljuq Turks and the Byzantines did not occur until after the reign of Basil II. However, the outcome of another war, the Byzantine-Georgian Wars, was in some ways influenced by the incursions of the Seljuq Turks into Georgia, so it is unlikely that they were unheard of. When the Seljuq Turks did encounter the Byzantines, they had chosen a good time to attack. Byzantium was faced with weak rule, Norman conquests and the schism, whilst the Abbasid Caliphate had recently been seriously weakened with its wars against the Fatimid dynasty. Initial conflicts 1064 to 1071. Ever since the early 11th century, the Seljuq Turks from Central Asia had been expanding westward, defeating various Arab factions and occupying the Abbasid Caliphate's power base in Baghdad. At the same time, the Byzantine Empire was making a few gains in Edessa and Syria. In 1067 the Seljuq Turks invaded Asia Minor, attacking Caesarea, and in 1069 Iconium. A Byzantine counterattack in 1069 drove the Seljuq Turks back from these lands. Further offensives by the Byzantine army drove the Turks back across the Euphrates. Despite this, the Seljuq Turks continued their incursions into Asia Minor, capturing Manzikert. The Byzantine Emperor Romanus Diogenes led an army in an attempt to score a decisive blow against the Seljuqs and add some military justification to his rule. During the march, Alparslan, the leader of the Seljuq Turks, withdrew from Manzikert. His tactical withdrawal allowed his army to ambush the Byzantines, reclaiming Manzikert shortly after. The victory itself led to few gains at the time for the Seljuq Turks, but the civil chaos that resulted in the Byzantine Empire allowed the Seljuqs and various other Turkic allies to swarm into Asia Minor. Turkic conquests 1071 to 1096. After Manzikert, the Seljuq Turks concentrated on their eastern territorial gains, which were threatened by the Fatimid dynasty in Egypt, although Alparslan encouraged other allied Turks and vassals to establish beyliks in Asia Minor. Many Byzantines at the time did not see the victory as a total disaster, and when the Turks began occupying the countryside in Anatolia, they began to garrison the Byzantine cities as well, not as foreign conquerors but as mercenaries requested by various Byzantine factions. One Byzantine emperor even gave the city of Nicaea as defense to the invading Turks in 1078. The result of the civil war meant that pretenders to the Byzantine throne sought Turkic aid by conceding Byzantine territory. The loss of these cities, such as Nicaea, and another defeat in Anatolia led to a prolongation of the war. The civil conflict finally ended when Alexius I Comnenus, who had been leading imperial armies to defeat revolts in Asia Minor, became a rebel himself and seized the Byzantine throne in 1081. Despite emergency reforms implemented by Alexius I, Antioch and Smyrna were lost by 1084. However, between 1078 and 1084 the city had been in the hands of Philaretos Brachmios, an Armenian renegade. By 1091, the few remaining Byzantine towns in Asia Minor inherited by Alexius were lost as well. However, all was not to end in defeat for Byzantium. In 1091, a combined Seljuk-Pecheneg invasion and siege of Constantinople was thoroughly defeated, whilst the Norman invasions had been held back as well, allowing the empire to focus its energies against the Turks. The Byzantines were thus able to recover the Aegean islands from Xerxes and destroy his fleet, and even regain the southern littoral of the Marmara Sea in 1094. In 1094, Alexius Comnenus sent a message to Pope Urban II asking for weapons, supplies and skilled troops. At the Council of Clermont in 1095, the Pope preached a crusade to be undertaken in order to capture Jerusalem and, in the process, assist the Byzantine Empire, which could no longer guard Christendom in the East from Islamic aggression. Though the Crusades would assist the Byzantine Empire in reconquering many vital Anatolian towns, it also led to the dissolution of the empire in 1204, during which time the Byzantines struggled to hold on to their territories. Byzantium survives. 1096 to 1118. The first Crusaders arrived in 1096 following Alexius' appeal to the west. The agreement between the Byzantines and the Crusaders was that any Byzantine cities recaptured from the Turks would be handed over to the empire. This was beneficial for the Crusaders as it meant that they did not have to garrison captured towns and lose troop strength whilst maintaining their supply lines. The Byzantines, in return, would supply the Crusaders with food in a hostile territory, and Alexius' troops would act as a reserve to reinforce them in any dangerous situations. The Crusaders first set about attacking Nicaea on 6 May 1097. Kilij Arslan I was unable to assist the Turks there due to the immense size of the Crusader armies. Another small defeat on 16 May convinced Kilij Arslan to withdraw and abandon the city, which surrendered to the Byzantines on 19 June. After this, a decisive victory at Dorylaeum gave the Crusaders an Asia Minor that was open to attack. Sozopolis, Philomelium, Iconium, Antioch in Pisidia, Heraclea and Caesarea all fell to the Crusaders, and they even reached as far as Cilicia, where they liberated the Armenians from Turkic rule, establishing a supply base. Unfortunately for Alexius Comnenus, the Byzantines were unable to fully capitalize on these conquests, with Caesarea returning to the Seljuks as a part of the Sultanate of Rum along with several other cities such as Iconium, the future capital of the Seljuk Turks. However, in a campaign in 1097, John Ducas, the Megas-Du, led both land and sea forces which re-established firm Byzantine control of the Aegean coastline and many inland districts of western Anatolia, taking the cities of Smyrna, Ephesus, Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea and Choma from the demoralized Turks. Following their victories, the Crusaders went on to lay siege to Antioch, a city under Seljuk occupation. The siege marked the end of Crusader assistance to the Byzantines due to the simulations of Stephen of Blois. Kerboga, a vassal of the Seljuk Turks, had a huge army of 75,000 troops sent to relieve Antioch. His unsuccessful siege of Edessa allowed the Crusaders time to capture Antioch on 3 June, 1098, a day before Kerboga's arrival. Despite this, Kerboga's troops were able to breach the citadel, where vicious and desperate fighting allowed the Crusaders to repulse his offensive. At this point, one of the Crusaders present, Stephen of Blois, deserted, and reaching Alexius Comnenus warned him that the Crusaders were destroyed and the Byzantine emperor was forced to turn back. As a result of this apparent desertion of Alexius I, the Crusaders refused to hand back Antioch when they managed to defeat Kerboga's scattered army. With this resentment, the Crusaders largely abandoned assisting the Byzantines against the Seljuks and their allies. A further crusade in 1101 to follow up the successes of the first ended in total defeat and the consolidation of Seljuk power in Asia Minor, with Iconium being established as the capital of the Sultanate of Rum. Byzantine counter-attack 1118 to 1176. John II Comnenus. The death of Alexius I brought John II Comnenus to power. By now, the Seljuk Turks had fractured and became loosely allied to each other. During this time the Sultanate of Rum was busy fighting off their former allies, the Danishmends. John Comnenus was able to use this to his advantage as he undertook a series of campaigns in Anatolia and Syria. John successfully captured the southern coast of Anatolia as far as Antioch, defeated an attempt by the Gabras family to form a breakaway state in Trebizond, and recaptured the ancestral home of the Comnenus family at Kastamonu. Despite this, Turkish resistance was strong and John did not capture the Seljuq capital at Konya, nor were all of his conquests held. The city of Gangra, captured by John in the 1130s, was lost again as the emperor had left it with a garrison of just 2,000 men. John spent considerable time and effort on a series of campaigns in Syria, which emphasized his dominance over the local Crusader kingdoms, especially Edessa and Antioch, but resulted in no long-term territorial gains for the Byzantine Empire. The emperor did strengthen the Byzantine army by recruiting new divisions and establishing new castles, fortifications and training camps in Byzantine territory. However, the scale of resources poured into his campaigns in Syria was far greater than in Anatolia, suggesting that John viewed prestige as more important than long-term conquest. In 1143, a fatal hunting accident to the Emperor John robbed the Byzantines of the opportunity to achieve further progress. Manuel Comnenus John II died in 1143, leaving the Byzantine Empire a strong army, significant reserves of cash, and improved prestige. However, the new emperor, Manuel Comnenus, directed much of his attention to Hungary, Italy, Serbia and the Crusader states rather than Anatolia. While Manuel was largely successful in defeating attacks on the empire and holding the Balkans, his policy in Italy was a failure and the lavish expenditure of his rule has been criticized, most notably by the Byzantine historian Choniates. During this period, the Seljuk Turks were able to subdue their enemies, the Danishmends under Geuiwogbil II. This resulted in a powerful centralized Turkish state based at Konya, leaving the Byzantines arguably in a worse position than they had been under John II. For the time being, Manuel's policy was not without merit as the emperor established peaceful coexistence with the sultan and initiated measures such as allowing Turkmen to pay for pasture on Byzantine land, which were clearly meant to deter raiding. The establishment of the theme of Neocastra on the northern part of the Aegean coast near Pergamon was also praised by Choniates. However, when Geuiwogbil refused to hand over the city of Chivas, which he was bound to do under an earlier agreement with Manuel, the emperor declared war in 1176 and led a very large army estimated at around 30,000 men into Seljuk territory with the intent of taking its capital, Iconium. However, the Byzantine force was ambushed in a mountain pass with consequent heavy losses to both sides. This battle, the Battle of Myriokephalon, resulted in the Byzantine campaign of conquest being abandoned. The battle was tactically indecisive with both leaders keen to seek peace. Following this, Manuel's army continued to skirmish with the Turks in Anatolia, defeating them in a smaller but indecisive battle in the Meander Valley. Regardless of this small respite, Myriokephalon had far more decisive implications than the casualties would suggest. There was no more Byzantine reconquest in Asia Minor after 1176, leaving the process begun by Alexios incomplete at best. For the Seljuks, the acquisition of Danishmend territory gave them a victory, though once again the Seljuks had to contend with neighboring disputes leading to the peace treaty as requested by both leaders. By the terms of the treaty, Manuel was obliged to remove the armies and fortifications posted at Dorylaeum and Sublaeum. However, Manuel Comnenus refused, and when Geuiwogbil tried to enforce this treaty, a Turkish army invaded Byzantine territory and sacked a string of Byzantine cities as far as the Aegean coast, damaging the heartland of Byzantine control in the region. Nevertheless, John Vatatzes, who was sent by the emperor to repel the Turkish invasion, scored an ambush victory over the Turks at the Battle of Hylian and Limochair in the Meander Valley. The Turkish commander and many of his troops were killed while attempting to flee, and much of the plunder was recovered. An event that has been seen by historians as a sign that the Byzantine army remained strong and that the defensive program of Western Asia Minor was still successful. After the victory on the Meander, Manuel himself advanced with a small army to drive the Turks from Panasium and Lacerium, south of Kottayam. However, in 1178 a Byzantine army retreated after encountering a Turkish force at Charax, allowing the Turks to capture many livestock. The city of Claudiopolis in Bithynia was besieged by the Turks in 1179, forcing Manuel to lead a small cavalry force to save the city, and then, even as late as 1180, the Byzantines succeeded in scoring a victory over the Turks. However, the continuous warfare did have a serious effect upon Manuel's vitality. He declined in health and in 1180 succumbed to a slow fever. Furthermore, like Manzikert, the balance between the two powers began to gradually shift. Manuel never again attacked the Turks, and after his death, they began to move further and further west, deeper into Byzantine territory.